Walter Lefmann, Director of Security at Chicago Trading, where he's responsible for information security, physical security, life safety, disaster recovery, and business continuity. And he is also the 2022 Chicagoland Midcap CISO of the Year. Walter?
Thank you. Can you hear me? If not, the microphone doesn't work. My mouth really does. For some of you who have been at the DePaul Risk Conference or the ISSA chapter this month, this might see a little repeat, so I apologize a little on that. You can grab a coffee, but it is the sermon that I am preaching these days. I'm very passionate about it, which probably means I'm going to run through my slides too fast, but there it is. First, the usual disclaimer. This is all me. I carry all the blame. Everyone else will disavow me. So, talking about resilience, I have some life lessons in resilience myself that help set my mindset, and maybe give a little background for me just so that you understand where I come from. I do like to do things for fun that require a little bit of resilience and survivability. That's one. That's great. Skydiving is great. You're 45 seconds from impact when you start. And one way or another, you are going to land. The only thing you're worried about is how fast. So there's a lot of training and thought and planning and resiliency and stuff like that. Another thing I used to do, also for fun, was a volunteer New York City auxiliary police officer and sergeant. So you're out in the street in a uniform, no gun. You have a flashlight and a nightstick and a radio, but what you really have is your wits. And everyone knows who you are, but you don't know what's out there. And many tales, you couldn't make this crap up. Scuba diving. Wreck diving Lake Michigan. Yes, it's very cold. You go inside a 39-degree water wreck in the dark at the bottom of Lake Michigan at 130 feet, and you carry at least 2 of everything you need to live. And then, love to play with sharks. Let's see if I can, no, I can't make the video play. That was a school of hundreds of hammerhead sharks, but more interesting where that was, there was lots of current, and if you didn't get down and shelter behind the bommy where the coral was, the current would take you away. And one of our group did manage to get blown away. By the time they hit the surface, they were a mile away. By the time they were picked up, they were 2 miles away. But they had the gear to survive. They had the resiliency. They had the signal inflatable tubes. They had the air horns. And more importantly, they had the marine radio, because at a mile away, that's all that's going to save you. So I do resilient things for fun. So I also, unfortunately, get to do it for work, fortunately. So this is the goal, GCSI. Building Cyber Resilience, Surviving Threats Today and Tomorrow. That was the subtitle. Great goal. I just thought about it more and realized, how do you actually define cyber resilience? What does it mean? Is it 100% prevention and protection? We all know that ship has sailed. High availability, data backup and recovery? Sure, that's definitely part of it. Well, who owns it? CISO? IT? And is it just cyber? And for that matter, what constitutes survival? And who defines that? And as a CISO, as a cybersecurity leader, how do we approach that? Well, the mature CISO and program hits it with a risk-aware, risk-based program. That is, it's currently the modern way. We certainly work to identify the crown jewels, what to protect in the enterprise, prioritize where we spend our limited resources to best effect to prevent loss. We still work hard on prevention, of course. Increasingly, you accept that it will be when, not if, when a problem happens. And we start to pursue recovery capability in our programs as well. Data backup and restore, clearly a biggie, especially with ransomware. We have developed many frameworks to measure risk and report risk and guide the work of our execution teams and prioritize where we spend our resources. Well, here's a question. Which framework is best? And my answer is, it doesn't matter. As long as you have something, and it has to be the right sized thing, because if you want to go to the full FAIR model and your CFO doesn't even manage their financial risk that tightly, you're just right over their head. But it doesn't matter. You got to have something for sure, just to keep the program in order. But here's the question. Does a risk-based program actually define resilience? I don't think so. Risk-based programs prioritize work and spend. What's important to protect? What should you work on first and next? What should you patch and when? What should we pay attention to? What threats are out there that we should be watching? And what do we want to spend on it? But the focus is usually preventing loss. The methodology is usually bottom up. You've got all these metrics. You got your patching metrics, your threats, your risks, and you try to boil it down to one number for your board sometimes, which is an entirely separate presentation. Recovery is there, but it's often in pieces. It's like I have a piece of technology. How do I make it resilient? High availability, backup and restore, whatnot. All of this contributes to resilience, but it doesn't define it with focus. So now I'm going to go back to my other life, the BC-DR stuff. I've had some lessons in BC and DR that help inform how I'm approaching resilience these days. First lesson from my own company, financial industry. Workstation is dead. Production options trading workstation, got a malware alert. My security operations center, on it, took care of it, isolated it. Cyber resilience check. Found the threat, neutralized the threat. Excellent. Well then the questions started from my trading support team. It's like, well, when can we get it back? Can't you scan it and clean it up? How long will it take? Why don't you have a plan for this? It's like, plan? It wasn't my plan. I thought it was your plan. The workstation could die for any number of reasons. Could lose a memory chip, could lose a drive. Anything can go wrong with it. I was just one of the threats. So I didn't have the recovery plan. I assumed you had the recovery plan for what happened when these things happen. Well, there you go. Lesson number 1, recovery from cyber events is moving out of InfoSec. It's really, business and business operations thing. And we clearly need some better communication on this to make sure we know who owns the ball. Another feature of my role, as I mentioned, was I do cover business continuity, actual physical security, life safety, business continuity. So the next lesson I had was Hurricane Sandy. He had a plan. It seemed like a solid plan. Plan meets storm. So one observation, you see that lower left-hand side? One of my traders lives in that neighborhood. So he might not be thinking about what to do about recovering CTC that day. And in fact, we certainly had the plan. The scenarios were certainly narrower than reality. That happens a lot. More interestingly, the most interesting thing we learned is our New York staff, who had roles in the plan, suddenly had very different roles. They were working on their homes and their families. So, we did survive. Because our basic BCDR approach was less about having a solid, detailed, step-by-step plan than building capabilities, toolboxes of capabilities to conduct business operations. Less about what broke, but how do we actually achieve things? So, first thing, plans don't survive contact or threat. I'm sure that's a duh for everyone else in here, but sometimes it's important to remember that when you're in the trenches because you're working on plans all day. And it's good to pick up your head and realize that the plan's probably not going to work ultimately. And that it's the capabilities that can adapt and improvise to execute necessary business operations. And that's going to be the key. The necessary business operations is kind of your guide. And one more lesson that actually ties the cyber and BC together fully. Ransomware, right? For a long time, cybersecurity and BCDR were kind of separate. I mean, there were big outages and things, but for the most part, it wasn't a DR thing until it was terrible, terrible. And that didn't happen often. Well, now it happens every day. The ransomware immediately brought those two things completely together. The data breaches, they're expensive. You lost data. It'll cost you money. Your stock will go down. You probably recover in 2 or 3 years anyway. But it's not usually a firm ending event. Ransomware can be. So the object, gotta go back. Resiliency is key. We've come to that. That's sort of why we have GCSI and we talk about resiliency all the time. But it's not a cybersecurity issue. It's not just a cybersecurity issue. So what is it? How do we focus? It's a key organizational goal now, but it's still kind of fuzzy, at least it was to me. It certainly goes well beyond cybersecurity, as I discovered the hard way, with just taking out one lousy workstation. We have been managing risk in our silo, but we can't just manage risk to prevent loss. We have to manage risk with the goal of assuring essential outcomes. And that is the lens that brings focus to resiliency. And there's a concept that I was introduced to at a conference in 2018, been around a long time, but this is where I got introduced to it, that really resonated with me to help that focus. Mission assurance. Mission assurance, I learned at an NTSC Central Regional CISO Policy Roundtable, a talk by Dr. Kamal Jabbour of the Air Force Research Laboratory. The military has had the concept of mission assurance for a long time. It is the integrated engineering, operations, and planning and design for a full life cycle with the goal of assuring that you can achieve specific outcomes. And they have a very rich and deep methodology. They have mission assurance category levels. They have specific policies, procedures, and metrics and things like that. Your organization, if it's not something that's as vital as the military, doesn't necessarily need to go that far, but I still think the concept will provide the focus that you need. So in the mainstream, what is the benefit? It provides clarity of purpose and a North Star for everyone, but clarity of purpose for and from the executives. They live in the world of the why. Why are we here? What are we supposed to be getting done? Clarity of priorities for the what, which is the risk management program, trying to figure out what to work on in order to support the why. And then clarity of priorities and delivery requirements for the how, the execution teams that are just getting the work done every day. It's cross-disciplinary in all of org. You're no longer alone. Cyber resilience isn't a thing that can stand alone. It gets buy-in and focus and funding org-wide, and it informs everything. It should inform your design, your engineering, your process and policies, incident response, operations, budgets, and of course, cyber resiliency falls into there. So great. Well, it's ever evolving and adapting too. It always things. I will say there are layers and there are traps. We'll get to that. So, resiliency is our mission. Got it. Oh, okay, now what's the mission? Oh, yeah. There are certainly everyday critical missions. This is what you do every single day to make money for your company. It's what you get measured on for your performance reviews typically. It's how your normal budgeting and all of that. What I'm going to ask to focus on, especially for resiliency, what I call core missions. There are deep down, fundamental core missions that address survival under duress. And unless you have a big, complicated program like the military, I have a simple litmus test for how to find your core missions. It's the thing where failure is not an option, where if you start to talk to someone and say, I can't do X or it's down, they say, yeah, fine, we'll fix it tomorrow. When you hit the right one, they'll say, no, this is it. You can't not do that. Let me give some examples, both of missions and mostly core missions. So my first example is the airline industry. Day-to-day mission is very clear. You load the passengers and cargo, you take off on time, you fly, you land on time, you deliver the passengers and cargo. All the operations, most of the risk management, most of the resiliency is focused on that mission. But when faced with serious disruption, the core mission gets laid bare. And I remind you of Flight 1549 in January 2009. There's the core mission. No casualties. Every takeoff is optional. Every landing is mandatory. And in 1 minute for that flight, the core mission became the only mission. Fortunately, the U.S. airline industry is very good at keeping a clear focus on that core mission and does a good job funding, maintaining the training, gear, protection, procedures, response and recovery capabilities for all of that. It can be challenging to maintain that focus, though. So, poll here. Do you listen to the flight attendant briefing when you get on a plane? Do you read the card in detail? So here's a pro tip. When they tell you the nearest exit might be behind you, it might be the exit by the tail, which you can't use in the water. So if you went backwards thinking that was the closer exit because you read the front of the card, should have read the back of the card. So I mentioned there were traps. One of the key traps that I always find is forgetting the core mission. We have that day-to-day mission, remember? It's what we do every day. It's where we spend so much of our time and focus. I have another story to illustrate this, also from the airline industry. So my sister was flying from visiting my parents from a small regional airport, Binghamton, New York. Had twin-engine turboprop, small planes. When she was getting ready to leave, the pilot was having trouble starting and stabilizing the engines. Eventually, she got freaked out. She doesn't like planes anyway, and she asked to let off. Eventually, they just canceled the flight, and everyone deplaned. But she later came across the pilot in the airport on a payphone. There was no office in there or anything like that. It's a reputable major U.S. airline, but it's just a small regional airport. So the pilot was using the payphone to contact the home office. And she overheard one sentence, which really stuck in my head. The pilot was saying, no, I'm the pilot, and we're not flying that aircraft. And so I'm reading a little into this, but what I'm seeing is that the pilot is focused on the core mission. Guy on the other side of the phone is focused on the day-to-day mission. You need to get that plane going. You got to get that flight done. The good news is the pilot was in the position to make the call, right? And keep that focus on the core mission. Another story I have for keeping an eye on the core mission is, it's easy to follow best practices without testing it against your mission. And this example is a finance industry security one. So I used to work for a somewhat large bank that got a new CISO. He gathered his entire global team together for a conference. Among the other things in the conference, we saw presentations from vendors on products they were trying to sell us. And after one of them, the product was an access and authorization entitlement control system for our money movement systems, how we move capital in the company. And when the vendor left, the CISO took a poll, and there were 65 people in the room. He says, how many people think this system should fail closed? What do you think? Most of them raised their hands, because that's the security canon. Security fails closed. How many people think this should fail open? 2 people raised their hands. When asked why, they recited the core mission of the firm. It's like, if I fail closed, we don't move any money. We don't move any money, we're out of business overnight. If I fail open, we may lose tens of millions of dollars to fraud, mistakes, and errors, whatever. We're still in business in the morning, though. They realized that the core mission was moving the money. Even if you're losing some of it, it was still better. I'm happy to say that I was one of the 2 people. The object lesson. Core always trumps the daily mission. Don't lose sight of it. The operations must include decision makers with focus on the core mission and the authority to act. We'll get to that in another example in a minute. And all voices that speak to the core mission must be sought and heard. Dissenting voices especially, and voices from all levels in the org. Well, I was at the bottom of the org. Fortunately, the other guy who raised his hand was the CISO, so he didn't have that problem. He could make that influence, but that doesn't always happen. I think of space shuttle disasters and how little important tidbits were buried in the bottom of PowerPoint slides, and engineers didn't feel like walking in front of the press and saying, "We really shouldn't do this." You need to find ways to expose those voices. Next trap: not seeing the connection to the core mission. Something that you thought was inconsequential, but really strikes to the heart of your organization. This example is back to the finance industry, Knight Capital. I don't know if any of you remember Knight Capital. They were a major trading operation, 17% of U.S. equities trading, Knight Capital. They experienced what was essentially a firm-ending event with a trading error that lost $460 million. The cause was one specific automated trading system, retail liquidity program, relatively minor P&L operation, not the top of priority attention for support and operations, QA. On the day in question, the triggering event was a mere 212 small retail orders. In a discussion I attended analyzing the event, some of the contributing factors to what happened, they had a software update, followed by a failed rollback, challenges monitoring the market positions and risks, challenges getting support engaged, challenges getting rapid decisions escalated and made while the problem was happening. In 45 minutes or so, 4 million orders were placed into the market. The SEC noted, lots of gaps in the transition, in the management there. What is my lesson? Every operation and every procedure, old or new, has to be held up to that litmus test. Is it related to your core mission? In a trading firm, core mission is you have to know your position in the market and you have to be able to manage that risk. Anything Anything that puts orders in the market has a direct line to your beating heart. Because once it's in the market, if you can't find it, you can't manage it, your firm could end immediately. So no matter how small it is, always check whether it's touching your core mission. And then if it does, nothing gets a pass from the highest level of mission assurance. Oh, again, back. What's the mission? How do you find that mission? It's a good question. I'll give you a hint. No one team can do it, not even your exec and board. They probably don't know either in many ways. The two effective approaches I have found is to stress test your mission, both hypothetically and in real life. Hypothetically, the incident response tabletop exercise is your best thing. No matter how lightweight it is, you're going to learn something, especially when you start to poke at things that might be part of your mission. And after-action review of incidents that you do survive is also critical. But here's the thing, the deep review. You're going to invest more in the after-action review for a trivial incident than you think is wildly worthwhile. But that's where you do your learning. You pay back that tuition that you've already paid. You had the incident. Get the most out of it that you possibly can. The other note here, I said, the tabletop is only useful if it involves all the stakeholders. Because like I said, no one person has the puzzle. I actually found out some of the most interesting technical things that we needed to be resilient on from our CFO. So if our CFO wasn't there, our chief legal officer wasn't there, our chief compliance officer wasn't there, with the tech team responding to a ransomware tabletop, we would not have gotten clarity on some of the things we needed to know. And certainly, the consultant who helped us with that tabletop said of all the orgs he's worked on, and he works at an incident response consultancy, so he sees a lot of dead bodies on the floor, so to speak. He said the ones that do these broad tabletops, those are the ones that tend to survive most, even if they have technical gaps in their cybersecurity technology and teams. Oh, I am going fast. I'm already to the wrap-up. Mission assurance, I think, is the pinnacle of resiliency thinking. It brings focus to building resiliency for cyber and for everything. It speaks to all levels of the org, especially your board and executives, because they are thinking about accomplishing things, not whether your backups can be restored. They just want to know whether they can do business. It clarifies and crystallizes decisions and puts them in the right hands. Once you realize that something you need to do for an incident response to maintain your core mission needs to be in that frontline operations hands to be done fast enough. If you have to call your CEO, you're probably underwater before it's all over. And it cuts through distraction and complacency. If you can tie it to the core mission, everyone can get that. So the takeaways that I would say are important. Clearly identify your missions, day-to-day, of course, but the core missions, and understand the difference between those two. Certainly, during our tabletop, one of the interesting things I thought was a core mission was protection of intellectual property. I spent a lot of time and effort on that. And during the exercise, besides the ransomware, one of the injects was, hey, we stole all your source code. And everyone looked at me and goes, whatever. So I was like, okay, if you're investing a lot in this, but right now, that didn't seem to be up there. And yes, there's triage for the immediate ransomware, but it does set the level. That's no longer a core mission necessarily. That more falls back to the day-to-day. So stress test those missions. Tabletops is the safest way, because you don't actually hurt anyone. But when you get incidents, don't waste them. And then, of course, do it over and over and over again. You'd be surprised how fast some core missions change, or where you'll dig up something you didn't understand, or you find something that touches the heart of your business that just sort of snuck in there. It was just a skunk work project. Oh, wait, now it's a $100 million business. And that's it. I tried to be quick. I hope I wasn't too quick. Any questions?
It seems to me that I remember a point in time in the 1980s where the term disaster recovery was dropped for the term business continuity. And it seems to me that that also correlates to, are you focused, business continuity is synonym for the core mission in what you're presenting?
It's certainly very closely related. It is BCDR because the core missions usually are disasters when they're failing. So there's business continuity at smaller scales, but those could even be for recovering your day-to-day mission, if that makes sense. So this is trying to to sort it out so the continuity is focused first on the things that kill you. Other question?
Continuity, I want to make as also resilience.
Yes.
Walter, have you done this exercise with your org and other orgs, not just your team, but the broader team of answering the question, what do we do? What is our core mission? I've done this exercise myself in different organizations, and you get wildly different answers. And so how have you, if you have, worked with your executives to come to that actual answer?
And that was my hook into there was the tabletop experiment. First, I started with the tech team only, so that they weren't like thrown under the bus when they told the execs, yeah, it'll take us 3 days to restore the backups. But then I put them in the room, and when the execs were saying, well, let's try this, and they said, no, that won't work. Okay, well, let's try this. Oh, no, that won't work. And then the CFO gets up and it's like, look, the one thing I have to do is be able to see what my position in the market is and be able to hedge it. And I don't care if I do that with your technology. I don't care if I drive to the trading technology service provider and beg them for market access through a terminal that they own. I don't care if I have to do it on the phone with the brokers. But this is what I need to do. And that started to get things, crystallized. As well as the surprise that, all the work I put into protecting our source code was like, whatever. It's like, yeah, I'm going to cut that in the budget. But you're right, it has to be everybody.
Anybody? Once, twice? Thank you, Walter.
Thank you.